Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. A Brigadier General of the Nigerian Army, Musa Uba, was captured and murdered by ISWAP terrorists following an ambush in Borno State. On the same day, 25 schoolgirls were kidnapped in Kebbi State, and the next day, 3 people were killed in an attack on a church in Kwara State, an attack that was live streamed. What the heck is happening in Nigeria? Nigeria has dropped its plan to introduce a 15% duty on imported petrol and diesel. Regulators say fuel supply is stable and warns against panic buying or hoarding, noting they will continue monitoring the markets to ensure stability. What does this reversal mean for local refineries and overall fuel pricing? Ivory Coast raised 59.05 billion cefas from a short-term treasury bill, showing investors remains confident. S&P kept the country's BB/B rating stable, citing strong growth prospects and stable economy management. How will this affect Ivory Coast's future borrowing and investor investment? Joining us today for insight on the podcast is Sheyi Owojulube. Welcome, Sheyi, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Before we begin today, we extend our deepest condolences to the families of Brigadier General Musa Uba, the adopted schoolgirls in Kebbi, and the victims of the Kwara church attack. This tragedy is really a painful reminder of the urgent need to confront Nigeria's security challenge head on. I'll begin by asking Shay, this incident occurred within just 48 hours. We had a general killed, schoolgirls kidnapped, and an attack live stream. What does this tell us about the current state and the evolution of terrorism and criminality in Nigeria?
Well, I think I would start off where you stopped, where you said that it shows the urgent need to combat terrorism head front. Because in the recent months, we've been hearing news that the government has recorded successes, arrested some commanders. We've even heard about the government's regaining control of some communities, and we thought that that was progress. But what these incidents over the past few days have shown that things are not things are still bad, if I may put it like that. And it also shows that this issue or this menace is spreading across the country fast, or maybe it has already even spread and waiting to be activated, right? Because what we have had now is that it's no longer one terror group, as we have said on previous episodes of this podcast. It's now different terror groups, it's now different personalities operating under the name or under the guise of some terror groups. And they're using that as an excuse to foment attacks on rural communities, on even some urban communities. And as regarding the murder or the abduction and the murder of the general, that's a really sad incident, especially given the incidences that led up to that particular occurrence. You would remember that over the weekend, it was reported in the media that the general was a military convoy was ambushed and some people were killed and the general was said to have escaped. And later on, from a leaked conversation, we saw that a military convoy was on its way to him, but he was abducted before before the military could get to him and rescue him. So it's a really sad situation. It calls for an urgent need. This requires more than just a press statement. It requires more than just a condolence visit. People need to see actions, concrete steps taken, and states, subnational governments, both at the state level and the local level, need to intensify security efforts across their different regions. It's no longer restricted to one particular region. Every person that has influence, that has authority across the government, across all levels, need to take the issue of security seriously.
I mean, I do agree with you that we need to take it seriously, but I mean, we're seeing this come where, I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, the US had declared Nigeria as a country of personal concern, particular concern. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, did that. But then, I mean, we're seeing the constant attacks or, I mean, the kidnapping. This just shows that, the government needs to take action. And like you said, a visit is not going to be enough. Um, I know you had said some of the things, but what do you think is lacking? What gaps do you think allowed for us, ISWAP, to be able to successfully ambush a high-ranking military officer? Does this have an effect or does it imply um, that they're having a lack in their capacity as well, capabilities, and even having the equipment to protect themselves as well as they try to fight this insurgency? But then we have, I mean, schoolgirls kidnapped again. And we've seen this happen over again. We had the Dapchi girls, we had the Chibok girls. If we had had all these incidents happen before, why didn't our government take steps to ensure that this never happens again? And then when it does happen, there's a remedy, a quick remedy, a solution that they go into to ensure that the girls are even back. I mean, for Kwara State, it's so sad that we had that live stream. What do you think? I mean, the government needs to do urgent now to be able to get back the girls and to be able to address this situation because we can't go on like this in this country. It's really a bad situation at this point, and this is clearly showing it as well.
Well, you've asked the million-dollar question that every Nigerian is asking. What has the government done so far?
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that we see clips and even read reports of local communities and in some instances local government officials attending peace deal meetings with these non-state actors or these terrorists. It also doesn't help that the perception, so the perception of the people, of the citizenry towards the government's de-radicalization program for repentant terrorists or for repentant bandits. These constant attacks have already colored the perception of the citizenry towards those repentant Boko Haram members. And even from news reports, I was reading some days ago on Umangu, an investigation that some people who are reintegrated into the society after going through the government's de-radicalization program end up going back to meet the terror groups, or going back to being a part of the terror groups, because the stipends that the government promises doesn't get paid on time, or it's paid in half, and all of that. So all of this, first, it boils down to the issue of multidimensional poverty, which is at the heart, because the poverty, the inability to eat, the inability to earn a living is what pushes people, or what provides a steady stream of recruits for these groups, right? Because if you look at it, Nigeria has been engaged in this war, or in this battle, since as far back as 2009, 2010, when the Chibok girls were abducted. And so you begin to wonder that despite all the successes that the military announces, and despite the arrest, how come these people seem to multiply, or these groups seem to multiply? As regards what the government can do, intelligence has to be better. In the case of the Kebbi kidnap, and even in Kwara, we've heard from residents of those communities that they received intelligence that this was going to happen. People have come to give accounts of how they spotted strange movements. And when the government says, if you see something, say something. But in this instance, people have said things, people have said something. And at the end of the day, the government fails them. Even with this the Kebbi State, when a military team that was on the way to rescue them were also ambushed, right? So Nigerians cannot and should not be having the perception that there are moles in the military in the fight against terrorism, because clearly there are incidences that when we hear accounts of these things, we keep asking, how do they, right? So Nigerians should not be having that perception. The intelligence units across the armed forces need to do. So intelligence has to do better, and this issue of designating we will see what sanctions it may. We hope it doesn't come with economic sanctions or military sanctions against the military, given the fragile state of the Nigerian economy. But it doesn't help at this point. So what Nigeria needs to do is the Nigerian government needs to show and be bold. They need to show their boldness. People need to see them take proactive steps. People need to feel secure. This comes to the issue of state policing. It raises against the debate of state policing and how people can better guard their communities, right? So these conversations need to be brought to the forefront. Nigerians need to trust their government again. Nigerians need and deserve to feel safe in their homes, in their schools, in their place of worships again, in their places of worship again. So all of these needs to be addressed. Nigeria possibly needs to engage international partners on getting this solved once and for all.
I mean, I do agree with you with the part where you said that Nigerians do need to feel safe again. And one of the social contracts that the people enter with the government is that they're going to ensure that if we give you power or vote you into office, you have to ensure the security of life and property. That's like one of the first key responsibilities of every government. And if any government has failed to do that, then they have failed. The Nigerian government needs to urgently, address this. And most importantly, I agree with you, and I feel like there are no punitive actions. We're not seeing actions from the government because when people understand that they can do something and get away with it, that's when they keep doing it and more people keep doing it because they know that there are no repercussions, right? I hope the government can be able to address this because it's really sad and bring our girls back home. On to our second story. We see that the Nigerian government has reversed its plan of 50% import duty on petrol and diesel. What does this decision tell us about the state of the fuel market in Nigeria, the government's broader energy strategy, and why do you think this was reversed? Because I know, like we spoke about it a couple of podcasts ago, and the impact that it would have had on the Nigerian economy. Why do you think the government reversed it? Do you think they listened to the cries of the people or the pushbacks and the critics that, opposed this policy?
Well, in my opinion, that policy was premature, right? Because when you look at the data from the NUPRC, as at January, the Dangote refinery was supplying was not giving the entire supply, was not solely responsible. Let me put it like that, because I don't want to give a figure that's not accurate, right? Was not supplying the entirety of the petrol consumed in the Nigerian market. And the idea of a deregulated market is that everyone is free to import or to set prices at whatever rates they deem fit, of course, within the ambits of the law to avoid exploitation of consumers, right? Now, a 15% duty or tariff on imported petrol pushes the narrative that the government is perhaps leaning, or also pushes the narratives of, should I say, favoritism towards some people, right? Because how many refineries are actually producing locally? Apart from the Dangote refinery and then the Walter Smith refinery, that is quite a small one, right? The NNPC refineries have not been operational again. I'm not sure of what exactly is still coming out of the Port Harcourt refinery, but I think the Kaduna refinery has been shut down again. So we need to ask this question. Do you set your entire house on fire because of a few select, right? These protectionist policies, as we can call it, at the end of the day, doesn't exactly bode well for the economy. We saw it in the Buhari years when the borders were closed and they said the government wanted to encourage local production and all that. And we saw how that resulted in very high food inflation. So the idea of a deregulated market is that everyone is free to set prices, everyone is free to source their petrol or their goods from wherever. And I think that this decision to suspend is good, because it may later be introduced when you have multiple refineries who are then producing more than enough, maybe 2 or 3 times more than what the Nigerian households or the Nigerian populace require. So at that point, it becomes, yes, why is it necessary to import when we produce 2 or 3 times more than our daily consumption? That becomes a valid argument at that point. But at this point, it is premature and it would have put pressure on the market or the sector that is just emerging. That's the refining sector that is just emerging, because the sector would have been under pressure to ensure that every populace or every part of Nigeria is supplied petrol, which may not always be the situation.
Yes, I can hear you. So,
Yes, I'm done.
okay, lastly, we go to the story of Ivory Coast. They were able to secure a huge amount of money and investor funding. 59 billion CFA first, despite missing their target. How should we interpret investor sentiments towards the country at the moment, right? And do you think that this is successful for the short term, or do you think that the country's future borrowing cost or appetite for additional debt in the regional market? What do you think of the situation? I mean, for our listeners who don't even understand what's happening in Ivory Coast, can you just give us a breakdown and kind of like speak to what's going on in the country in terms of their investment funds that they've been able to secure as a country?
Well, to start off, let me just lay the foundation by saying that treasury bills is one of the ways that the government uses to raise funds to fund its activity, or uses to raise money to fund its activities, to be better put. Now, raising 59 billion silver is significant, right? Because it shows that investors are willing to trust the government of Ivory Coast with their money, right? And we should not also forget that the S&P maintained the country's BB rating at stable, right? So it shows that investors are willing to trust the government with their money. And in the short to medium term, it could even lead to higher participation, because the idea of a treasury is to say we give this to the government for, and since it's short term, for maybe 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, which was what we had in this case, to say we're willing to give the government money for this period at a particular interest, and we trust that they will pay back and they will not default. And what it also means for the government of Ivory Coast in future debt rounds is that they can then have improved access to the market for Eurobonds. They've already issued some Eurobonds in the past. So they can then have access to the Eurobond market and using their S&P rating to say, well, this is our rating. The S&P, which is a global platform, has said our economy is stable enough and we can, the risk of default is relatively low, right? So it means that even for within the economy, the local banks can borrow more cheaply, and foreign investors see that the risk of investing in Ivorian corporate debt or national debt is reduced, right? And it also shows, it's sort of a credit to the Ivorian government, because in S&P's rating, it mentioned that it has had steady economic management over the past few months, right? So it's sort of a credit to the Ivorian government because it reduces the perception of political risk, and it encourages long-term investors, people who are willing to invest in the economy for a long time. That's what we say, term investors. It encourages them to invest in the economy, and the FDI inflows that will support the currency and even boost the local market, the equities market, which is the stock exchange. It supports the inflow of money into the economy. And when money flows, it stimulates the economy. Companies can then take loans because there's money within the economy. They can take loans to expand their operations. When they want to expand their operation, they would need to recruit. So that's like job creation. So it's money, at the end of the day, puts money directly in the pockets of the Ivorian citizens, right? On the government side, when the government raises this kind of money, they can use it to invest in infrastructure and social programs, which ensures a better standard of living or a better quality of life for Ivorians.
Lastly, I would love to ask, what do you think the government is doing or the country is doing that makes it stand out to investors, despite their regional instability, and their macroeconomics pressure that the country is facing, if they're able to raise this amount of money, doesn't that say something of the investor confidence in them as well? But like, what do you think that they're getting right? I mean, on one hand, we're not
Well,
supposed on one hand, as countries, African countries, there's that conversation of us stopping to borrow and, find a way to get our own money within ourselves and be more productive to raise our own funds. But I mean, it's a tricky one.
well, let me start from that last. In the real sense of it, debt is not a bad thing, right? What matters is what you use the raise to do. So, for instance, if you approach a bank and you take a loan and you use it to build a small business, maybe laundry business, for instance, you would probably need to employ two or three people. That's created, right? So jobs created for the people you employ, and that's also revenue to the government for in terms of the taxes paid to the government, right? So it, it's not a bad thing. What it matters is what you do with the money that you have raised. And to your question, right, about what the Ivorian government has been doing, S&P said that they rated the Ivorian government as being one of the most stable. I just want to remember how they said it. They said it's one of West Africa's most stable macroeconomic environments, right? So what the market needs really is to understand the direction of where a government's economic reforms is headed. When people know the direction that the government is headed, then they can plan around those things. And when people can plan around the government's reforms, it makes the country more attractive for both portfolio investors, that's short-term money, and for long-term investors, right? So it's because people have looked at the reforms undertaken by the Ivorian government and they said, yes, this has been stable despite, all of the things happening. And you know that in the past few days, the government has tightened security because of the fuel blockade situation in Mali and its neighboring countries. So so that gives people or investors the perception that the Ivorian government is on the right track and they can plan around it.
Thank you very much, Shay. That brings us to the end of our podcast. It's such a pleasure having you again on this episode.
It was so good to be here.
And to all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. That's all for today. Thank you very much and see you again next week.